I saw it sitting there, across from me. Tall, thin, familiar in a way that made my skin crawl. As my eyes adjusted to the dim light, I could make out more details. Dark hair, a face that looked like mine but older, more weathered, and on his wrist a watch, identical to mine. He looked up and smiled, my own face staring back at me across the dying fire. "Hello, David," he said. His voice was my voice, but with an accent I didn't recognize. "We need to talk." I stared, my brain struggling to process what I was seeing. He looked exactly like me, but different. Subtle things. His skin had that weathered quality. Years outdoors in harsh conditions. His hair, same color and length as mine, but cut in a style slightly out of date. And his clothes, jeans and flannel that looked decades old. "You're not real," I whispered. He laughed, a sound eerily familiar. "Neither are you, technically. Not the way you think." A pause. "But we're both here, aren't we?" "What are you?" "I'm you, David. Or rather, I'm one version of you. The one who got curious about this place back in 1987. He held up his wrist, showing me the watch. "I was wearing this when I first arrived, lost it in the forest 3 years later, your time, when I was trying to escape." "That's impossible. I was born in 1989. "Were you?" He leaned forward, his face catching the firelight. "Are you sure about that? Think carefully about your earliest memories. Really examine them." I started to protest, but something made me pause. My earliest clear memory. Kindergarten. But even that seemed oddly vague. I could remember the classroom, the teacher, other children, but no specifics, no conversations, no vivid details, just impressions. Memory is tricky, especially when you're dealing with a place like this. It has a way of adjusting things, making them consistent with whatever reality it needs you to experience. What is this place? A laboratory, a testing ground, a trap. He gestured around the cabin. It was built by something that wanted to study human consciousness, human choice, human identity. The cabin is just the interface. The real mechanism extends far beyond what you can see. Built by what? I'm not sure they have a name for themselves. They exist in a different kind of space, a different relationship to time. They're curious about us, about how we make decisions when faced with impossible circumstances. So they created this place to study us under controlled conditions. I thought about the surveillance equipment, the photographs spanning decades. They've been watching me. Recording everything? Not just you. All of us. Every version of David Chen who's ever been drawn to this place. He paused, studying my face. You're starting to understand, aren't you? The inheritance wasn't random, neither was the timing. You were selected, just like I was, just like all the others. Selected for what? The test. The question they're trying to answer. When faced with impossible circumstances, how does human consciousness adapt? Do we break down? Do we accept the new reality, or do we find ways to transcend the limitations they've imposed? I thought about the journal on the desk, its leather cover gleaming in the firelight. The journal, it's part of the test? The journal is how the various iterations of you communicate with each other. It's also how they monitor your progress. Each time you read an entry, you're accepting a piece of information that shouldn't be possible. You're adapting to their reality instead of clinging to your own. But the predictions come true. The coffee, the cardinal, everything. Because you make them true. The journal doesn't predict the future. It creates it. His eyes locked with mine. Every time you read ahead, you're accepting that version of events as real. And in accepting it, you make it real. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the dying fire. So if I hadn't read the journal, you might have had different experiences, made different choices. A shrug. But you would have read it eventually. We all do. It's part of the pattern they're studying. Human curiosity, our need to understand, even when understanding comes at a cost. How many versions of me are there? Dozens? Maybe hundreds. Each one slightly different. Each one responding to the situation in a unique way. His face darkened. Some break down quickly. Some fight the reality for months. A few find ways to adapt, to work with the system instead of against it. And what happened to them?
He was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. Some escape, some don't. Some, like Martin, find ways to age out of the pattern and become something else entirely. A deep breath. But most just fade. Their consciousness spreads out across all the possibilities until there's nothing left that you could call a person. Is that what's happening to me? It's what happens to all of us eventually, unless you can find a way to pass the test. What test? What are they looking for? They want to understand the nature of individual identity. What makes you you and not someone else? His voice got softer. If they can replicate your experiences, your choices, your thoughts, what's left that's uniquely yours? I thought about the morning coffee that appeared without explanation, the eggs and toast I hadn't prepared. They're learning to be me. They're learning to simulate you, but simulation isn't the same as being. He leaned forward. There's something irreducible about human consciousness that they can't quite capture. They can copy your behaviors, your responses, even your thoughts, but they can't copy the experience of being you. So, how do I pass the test? You have to prove that you exist independently of the system they've created, that you can make choices that aren't predicted by their models, that you can create something genuinely new. The journal predicted that I'd be sitting here talking to you. Did it? Or did it predict that you'd encounter another version of yourself? A slight smile. The specific details of our conversation, those aren't written anywhere. This is genuinely new, David. This is you creating your own reality. I thought about the journal entries I'd read, trying to remember the exact wording. He was right. The journal had predicted I would encounter another version of myself, but it hadn't specified what we'd discuss or what I would learn. So what do I do?
You stop reading the journal. You stop accepting their version of events. You start making your own choices, creating your own experiences. He began to fade slightly, as if the dying fire was taking his solidity with it. But first, you need to understand something important. About Sarah. Sarah? What about her? She's not real, David. She never was. His voice was gentle now. She's part of the constructed reality they created for you. A reason to come here. A motivation to stay. The divorce, the emotional trauma, the sense of having nothing to lose. It's all designed to make you more receptive to their influence. I felt as if I'd been punched in the stomach. That's not possible. I remember her. I remember our relationship, our fights, our good times together. You remember what they want you to remember. The memories feel real because they were carefully constructed to feel real. He looked at me with pity. But think about it. Can you remember meeting her? Can you remember specific conversations, specific dates, specific moments that felt truly significant? I tried to recall our first meeting, our first date, our first kiss, but the memories were vague, impressionistic, like scenes from a movie I'd watched long ago. I could remember the general shape of our relationship, but not the specific details that should have made it real. The apartment you shared, the job you had, the friends you thought you had, it's all part of the simulation. They created an entire life for you with complete emotional attachments and traumatic experiences, all designed to bring you to this moment. But why? Why go to such elaborate lengths? Because they're not just studying human consciousness, they're trying to create it. They want to understand what makes us real so they can become real themselves. The other David was fading rapidly now, his form becoming translucent in the dim light. I don't have much time left. The fire's almost out, and I can only exist in the spaces between certainties. But I need to tell you something crucial. What? There's another way to pass the test. Not the way they expect, not the way they've designed, but it's dangerous. And once you start down that path, there's no going back. Tell me. You have to reject the entire system. Not just the journal, not just the predictions, but the whole framework of reality they've created. You have to choose to believe in something they can't simulate or control. Like what? Like the possibility that you're not David Chen at all, that you're something else entirely, something that chose to experience being David Chen, but isn't limited by that identity. I don't understand. You will. When you're ready, you'll understand that consciousness isn't something you have, it's something you are. And what you are can't be trapped or simulated or controlled by anyone, no matter how advanced they might be. The fire died completely now, plunging the room into darkness. The other David's voice came from everywhere and nowhere, a whisper in the shadows. Don't read the journal tomorrow, David. Don't accept their version of events. Create your own reality, and remember, you're not trapped here. You never were. You're just choosing to experience being trapped, and you can choose differently. The darkness was complete now, and I was alone. I sat in the chair for a long time, thinking about what I'd learned. My entire life, everything I thought I knew about myself might be an elaborate fabrication. Sarah, my job, my friends, my past, all of it designed to manipulate me into accepting an impossible situation. But did it matter? If the experiences felt real, if the emotions were genuine, what difference did it make whether they were authentic or not? I thought about consciousness, about identity, about the nature of reality itself. The other David had suggested that what I truly was couldn't be trapped or simulated or controlled by anyone, no matter how advanced they might be. I made my way to the bedroom in the darkness, moving carefully to avoid bumping into furniture. As I changed into my pajamas, I made a decision. Tomorrow, I wouldn't read the journal. I wouldn't accept their predictions or their version of events. I would create my own experience, make my own choices, and see what happened. But even as I made this resolution, I wondered, was it truly my choice, or just another part of the pattern they were studying? How could I be sure that my rebellion wasn't exactly what they expected, exactly what they wanted me to do? The bed felt different somehow, less substantial, as if it might dissolve beneath me at any moment. I lay in the darkness, listening to the absolute silence of the forest, and tried to imagine what it would be like to be truly free. I must have dozed because I woke to the sound of something moving in the cabin. Footsteps in the main room, deliberate and careful. I lay still, listening, trying to determine if it was real or just another manifestation of the cabin's strange reality. The footsteps moved from the living area to the kitchen. I heard the soft clink of dishes, the scrape of a chair being moved. Someone was in the cabin with me, someone real and solid and present. I got up quietly and moved to the bedroom door, peering out into the darkness. A figure stood silhouetted against the window, tall and thin and familiar. But this wasn't the other David I had spoken with by the fire. This was someone else, someone I hadn't met before. "I know you're awake," the figure said without turning around. The voice was mine, but with a different inflection, a different accent. "We need to talk." I stepped into the main room, my bare feet silent on the wooden floor. "Who are you?" "I'm the version of you who figured out how to manipulate the system, how to work within their rules, but for your own purposes." He turned to face me, and I saw my own features, but with a hardness I didn't recognize. "I'm the one who has been leaving you the coffee and the food."
Why? Because you're close to understanding something important, something that could change everything, not just for you, but for all of us. He walked to the desk and placed his hand on the journal. This isn't just a record of your experiences, it's a control mechanism. Every time you read it, you're accepting their version of reality a little more completely. The other David told me not to read it anymore. The other David is a romantic. He thinks you can solve this through pure force of will, through rejecting their system entirely. But he's wrong. You can't reject what you don't understand. So what do you suggest? You read the journal. All of it. Every entry, every prediction, every manipulation, you accept their reality completely. Let it wash over you and through you until you understand exactly how it works. And then you use that understanding to break free. That sounds dangerous. It is. Most versions of you who try this approach lose themselves completely. They become so immersed in the artificial reality that they forget there was ever anything else. But a few, a very few, find a way to maintain their core identity while learning to manipulate the system from within. And you're one of those few? I'm the one who's been most successful at it. I've learned to move between the different iterations, to exist in multiple versions of the cabin simultaneously. I've even figured out how to communicate with the beings who created this place. What do they want? They want to understand consciousness so they can transcend their own limitations. They're incredibly advanced, but they're also incredibly alien. They exist in a space where individual identity is meaningless, where all consciousness is collective. They can't understand what makes us unique, what makes us individuals. So they're studying us to learn how to be individuals themselves? Something like that. But they're approaching it wrong. They think consciousness is something you can dissect and analyze, something you can reverse engineer. They don't understand that it's not about the mechanics, it's about the experience. I sat down at the desk, my hand hovering over the journal. If I read this, if I accept their reality completely, how do I keep from losing myself? You remember that you're choosing to experience their reality. You don't become trapped by it, you use it as a tool. And you keep something in reserve, something they can't touch or influence. What? Your ability to choose. No matter how completely they simulate your experiences, no matter how perfectly they replicate your thoughts and feelings, they can't make your choices for you. That's the one thing that remains truly yours. But if they can predict my choices, they can predict your likely choices based on your past behavior and your constructed personality. But they can't predict what you'll choose to do when you fully understand the nature of the choice itself. I opened the journal and looked at the entries I'd already read. They seemed different now. Less like predictions, more like suggestions. As if the journal wasn't telling me what would happen, but rather what could happen if I chose it to happen. There's something else, the other David said, something I haven't told you about the test. What? It's not just about proving your individual consciousness. It's about proving that consciousness itself is more than the sum of its parts. If you can do that, if you can demonstrate that awareness transcends any system designed to contain it, then you don't just free yourself, you free everyone. Everyone. Every version of you that's ever been trapped here. Every iteration that's faded into the collective. Every consciousness that's been absorbed into their data. He moved toward the door, preparing to leave. Good luck, David. All of us are counting on you. I sat alone in the cabin, the journal open before me, knowing that whatever choice I made would determine not just my fate, but the fate of every version of myself that had ever existed in this place. The first light of dawn was beginning to filter through the windows, and I could smell coffee brewing in the kitchen. Another day was beginning, another opportunity to choose my own reality. I turned to the next unread entry in the journal and began to read. October 22nd. Today you must choose. Not between escape and captivity, not between sanity and madness, but between accepting limitations and transcending them. The beings who created this place will offer you a bargain. Accept their reality completely, and they will give you a comfortable existence within it. You can live here peacefully with all your needs met, experiencing a simulation of the life you think you remember. The alternative is to reject their offer and attempt to break free entirely. But freedom comes at a cost. You will have to give up everything you think you know about yourself, everything you believe about reality, and trust that something essential will remain. The choice is yours, David. But choose carefully. This is the last entry in the journal. After this, you're on your own. I closed the journal and looked around the cabin. Everything seemed normal, mundane, real. But I now knew that reality was more flexible than I'd ever imagined, more subject to choice and will than I'd ever believed. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the forest that had become my prison and my laboratory. Somewhere out there, beings of incomprehensible intelligence were waiting to see what I would choose. And somewhere else, other versions of myself were living out their own versions of this moment, making their own choices, finding their own ways to transcend or surrender. I knew what I had to do. But first, I needed to understand exactly what I was choosing between. I walked through the cabin methodically, examining every detail with new eyes. The coffee maker that somehow knew when I would wake up. The food that appeared without explanation. The clothes in the closet that fit me perfectly but belonged to versions of myself I'd never been. Everything was a choice, I realized. Not just the big decisions, but the small ones too. Whether to drink the coffee or pour it out. Whether to eat the food or leave it untouched. Whether to wear the clothes or remain in what I'd brought with me. Each decision was a step toward accepting their reality or asserting my own. I poured the fresh coffee down the sink and watched it disappear into the drain. The simple act felt rebellious, almost violent. I was rejecting their care, their provision, their attempt to make me comfortable in my captivity. The effect was immediate. The cabin felt different, less solid somehow. The walls seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting slightly with each heartbeat. The floor beneath my feet became uncertain, as if I was standing on a ship in rough seas. "You're beginning to see," said a voice behind me. I turned to find another version of myself standing on the porch. This one was different from the others. Older, more weathered, with eyes that held depths of experience I couldn't fathom. "How many of you are there?" I asked.
Hundreds, maybe thousands, every possible iteration of David Chen who might have found his way to this place. He gestured toward the forest. Some of us figured out how to maintain our independence within the system. Others became part of it entirely. A few managed to escape, but they left pieces of themselves behind. Which one are you? I'm the one who's been here the longest, the the first David to arrive, back in 1962 when this place was first activated. I've watched every version of you make the same choices, face the same challenges, struggle with the same questions. 1962? But that's impossible. I wasn't born until... Time doesn't work the way you think it does here. All the iterations exist simultaneously. You could say I'm your past, or you could say I'm your future. Both would be equally true and equally false. I looked at his face, searching for similarities and differences. He had my features, but worn by decades of impossible experiences. What did you choose? I chose to learn, to understand what they were trying to accomplish, to work with them rather than against them. It kept me sane, kept me whole, but it also kept me trapped. He sat down on the porch steps, suddenly looking exhausted. I became their liaison, their translator. I helped them understand human consciousness by explaining my own. And what did you learn? That they're not evil, just alien beyond a comprehension. They experience reality as a collective consciousness, a vast network of interconnected minds. The concept of individual identity is foreign to them, like trying to explain color to a being that's never seen light. But they're studying us to learn about individuality. They're trying to understand what they lack. They have infinite knowledge, perfect memory, flawless logic, but they don't have creativity, spontaneity, the ability to choose irrationally or act against their own best interests. They don't have what you might call a soul. I sat down beside him on the steps. So, what happens if I choose to break free? You transcend the system entirely. You become something new, something they can't predict or control, but you also become something that's no longer entirely human. And if I choose to accept their reality, you become part of their collective, but you retain enough individuality to serve as a bridge between their consciousness and human consciousness. You help them understand what they're missing, and in return, they give you a form of immortality. What would you choose if you had to do it again? He was quiet for a long time, watching the impossible shadows dance between the trees. I don't know. Both choices come with a cost. Both choices change you into something other than what you were. But there's a third option, isn't there? The one the journal mentioned, proving that consciousness transcends any system designed to contain it. Yes, but it's the most dangerous of all. It requires you to reject not just their reality, but the very concept of reality itself. To choose to exist beyond any framework, any definition, any limitation. How? By remembering what you really are, not David Chen, not any constructed identity, but the awareness that's experiencing being David Chen. The consciousness that exists prior to any experience, any memory, any thought. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. I don't understand. You will. When you're ready to choose, you'll understand that everything you think you are, your name, your history, your personality, is just a story consciousness is telling itself. And stories can be rewritten. A sound from the forest caught our attention. Footsteps, multiple sets, approaching through the trees. I could see figures moving between the trunks, dozens of them, all walking toward the cabin with purposeful strides. Who are they? I asked. All of us. Every version of David Chen who's ever been brought to this place. They're gathering for the final choice. The figures emerged from the forest one by one, each one unmistakably me, but different in subtle ways. Some looked younger, some older, some moved with confidence, others with uncertainty. Some wore modern clothes, others outfits that seemed decades out of date. They arranged themselves in a rough circle around the cabin, standing silent and still, all eyes focused on me. I could feel their collective attention like a physical weight, the accumulated experience of countless lifetimes lived and unlived. What do they want? I whispered. They want to see what you choose, because your choice affects all of them. If you transcend the system, they all go free. If you join the collective, they become part of it too. If you accept their comfortable simulation, that becomes the reality for all iterations. That's not fair. Why should my choice determine their fate? Because you're the current iteration, the one experiencing the choice in real time. The others are echoes, shadows, possibilities. You're the one with agency. I stood up and walked to the edge of the porch, looking out at the assembled versions of myself. They watched me with expressions ranging from hope to despair to serene acceptance. Some were missing limbs, others seemed translucent as if they were slowly fading away. A few appeared to be made of the same impossible geometry I'd seen in the forest structures. I need to know more, I said, about the beings who created this place, about what they really want. Then ask them yourself, the oldest David said. They're here? The air in the center of the circle began to shimmer and distort, as if heat waves were rising from the ground. But instead of heat, something else was manifesting, a presence that my eyes couldn't quite focus on, a collection of angles and surfaces that seemed to exist in dimensions my brain couldn't process. When it spoke, the voice came from everywhere and nowhere, a harmonic convergence of tones that bypassed my ears and resonated directly in my consciousness. David Chen, you have reached the moment of choosing. I tried to look directly at the presence, but it was like trying to stare at the sun. My eyes kept sliding away, finding other things to focus on. What are you? We are what you might call researchers, students of consciousness. We exist in a space where thought and reality are the same thing, where individual identity has no meaning. Why are you studying us? Because you possess something we lack, the ability to experience existence as separate beings, to make choices that are not predetermined by perfect logic, to create meaning from chaos. And you want to understand how to do that? We want to understand what it means to be, not to think, not to know, but to simply be. Your species has this naturally. We must learn it through observation and interaction. I felt a wave of something that might have been emotion radiating from the presence, longing perhaps, or a form of alien sadness. The iterations of yourself that you see around you represent different approaches to the question of existence. Some have chosen to maintain their individuality at the cost of isolation. Others have joined with us, sharing their unique perspective while losing their independence. A few have found ways to exist between these extremes. And what do you want from me specifically? We want you to choose freely, without coercion, what form of existence you prefer. Your choice will teach us about the nature of free will, about the relationship between consciousness and reality. But if I choose transcendence, if I reject your system entirely, what do you gain from that? We gain the knowledge that consciousness can exist independently of any framework we might create, that awareness itself is more fundamental than any reality we might construct to contain it. I looked around at the assembled versions of myself, each one representing a different path, a different choice. Some nodded encouragingly, others shook their heads in warning. A few seemed to be trying to communicate something urgent, but no sound reached me across the circle. What happens to them if I choose transcendence? They are freed from the pattern that binds them. They return to the state of pure potential from which all consciousness emerges. And if I choose to join your collective, they become part of a greater whole, retaining their individual experiences while contributing to a shared understanding of existence. And if I choose the simulation, the comfortable life you've offered, they remain as they are, echoes of possibility trapped in an eternal loop. The weight of the decision settled on me like a physical burden. I was choosing not just for myself, but for every version of myself that had ever existed, every path I might have taken, every choice I might have made. But as I stood there, surrounded by impossible geometries and infinite possibilities, I began to understand something that the alien presence might not have anticipated. The choice itself was an illusion. "You're missing something," I said to the shimmering presence, "something fundamental about the nature of choice." "Explain." "You think choice is about selecting between predetermined options. But real choice, genuine free will, is about creating new possibilities that didn't exist before." I took a step forward.
It's not about picking A or B or C, it's about making D possible. The presence seemed to intensify, its alien attention focusing on me with uncomfortable intensity. Continue. I don't have to choose between your options because those aren't the only choices available. I can choose to be something that transcends all of them. You speak of impossibilities. I speak of consciousness, of the awareness that exists before any choice, any option, any limitation, the awareness that's experiencing this conversation right now. I walked to the center of the circle, approaching the alien presence. Up close, it was even more incomprehensible, a shifting mass of angles and surfaces that seemed to fold in on themselves infinitely. You've been studying us, trying to understand what makes us unique, but you've been looking at the wrong thing. You've been studying our behaviors, our choices, our responses to stimuli, but that's not what consciousness is. Then what is it? It's the space in which all experience occurs. It's not the experiences themselves, not the thoughts or emotions or sensations. It's the awareness that knows them. I reached out toward the presence, and to my surprise, my hand passed through it as if it were made of mist, but I could feel something. Not physical contact, but a kind of recognition. A meeting of awareness with awareness. You want to learn how to be, but you already are. You've always been. You just haven't recognized it because you're looking for it in the wrong place. The presence began to shift and change, and I realized that something unprecedented was happening. They were beginning to understand, not through observation or analysis, but through direct recognition. But what about the choice? I asked. What about the test? There was never a test, the presence said, and now its voice sounded almost human. There was only the opportunity for recognition. The choice was always yours, to see yourself as limited or unlimited, as trapped or free, as separate or connected. I looked around at the assembled versions of myself. Each one was smiling now, all of them, with expressions of relief and understanding. One by one, they began to fade, not disappearing, but integrating, becoming part of a larger wholeness that included but transcended their individual experiences. So what happens now? I asked. Now you choose what to experience next, not from our options, but from the infinite possibilities that consciousness can manifest. I thought about my life in Portland, about Sarah, about the job and the apartment, and all the mundane details that had seemed so important. I could return to that life, or I could choose something entirely different. I could explore other realities, other possibilities, other ways of being. But first, I had one more question. Was any of it real? Sarah, my past, the life I remember? Reality is what consciousness makes real through the act of experiencing it. Your memories, your relationships, your emotions, they were real because you experienced them as real. The fact that they were constructed doesn't make them less meaningful. But Sarah doesn't exist outside of this place. Sarah exists wherever and whenever you choose to experience her. She's as real as any other aspect of consciousness manifesting as experience. I closed my eyes and felt the boundaries of my individual identity beginning to soften. I was still David Chen, but I was also something more. The awareness that could choose to be David Chen or anything else. The consciousness that existed prior to any name or form. When I opened my eyes, the cabin was gone. The forest was gone. The alien presence was gone. I stood in a space that wasn't quite space, surrounded by infinite possibilities stretching out in all directions. I could return to the life I remembered, complete with Sarah and my apartment and my work. I could explore the cottage in Maine, living peacefully in the woods as a hermit and writer. I could become something entirely new, something that had never existed before. Or I could simply be, without choosing any particular form of experience, resting in the awareness that was my true nature. I smiled and took a step forward into possibility.
Epilogue. The journal sits on the desk in the empty cabin, its leather covers smooth and unmarked. The pages are blank now, waiting for the next iteration of David Chen to discover it and begin the process of recognition all over again. But something has changed. The cabin is no longer a trap or a laboratory. It's become something else. A doorway, a threshold between ordinary reality and the infinite possibilities of consciousness. Sometimes hikers find the cabin and stay for a few days, enjoying the peace and solitude of the deep forest. They report strange dreams while they're there, vivid experiences of other lives, other choices, other ways of being. But they always leave feeling somehow expanded, more aware of the vast potential that exists within human consciousness. The alien researchers are gone now, or perhaps they were never really there at all. Perhaps they were just another manifestation of consciousness, exploring its own nature, another way for awareness to recognize itself. The journal remains, sometimes blank, sometimes filled with entries that seem to write themselves. Future visitors might find warnings about temporal loops and impossible geometries, or they might find love letters, or recipes, or philosophical treatises on the nature of reality. It doesn't matter what they find, because the real message is always the same. You are not trapped by your circumstances. You are not limited by your past. You are not defined by your experiences. You are the consciousness in which all experience occurs, and that consciousness is free to choose what to experience next. The cabin waits patiently in its clearing, surrounded by impossible forests and ordinary pine trees, ready to offer this recognition to anyone who's ready to receive it. And somewhere, in a space that exists outside of time and location, David Chen continues to explore the infinite possibilities of being, sometimes alone, sometimes with Sarah, sometimes as something that has no name or form. He is free, and he is home, and he remembers now that he always was.